Welcome to Leadership Rediscovered. This episode is a continuation of a conversation with Chuck Olsson, who is the Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for First United Bank and Trust. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the first episode, please go back and listen to it because it's really good.
Seen in multiple acquisitions and just what I consider one of many leadership mantras that I have is that change is the principle for opportunity. Meaning that if you want an opportunity, you have to have change. Now, my own career, every one of these mergers that took place where jobs are being eliminated, and I kept my head kind of up and said, I'm just going to keep working and try to contribute, kept providing me new opportunities. But you can't have an opportunity without change. But that's the way to diminish the fear. So in times when change is occurring, it's about talking about what it could be for you. What's in it for you? How's it going to help you? How's it going to what are your concerns with it? And it's hard to do that with a company maybe 20,000 employees, but you still have to practice that in some ways.
But that's the role of the manager and the person leading these people is to have those conversations. The CEO can't necessarily be in every single conversation if you have 20,000 people as an example. However, you have all of these other individuals that are in roles who can be the communicator, who can have those conversations.
So change is the biggest opportunity. And it is an opportunity to build trust or, kill trust. And so in light of that, how we respond and act, walking our talk, being open and honest. If we have to say it differently, then we have to come back and say, I said it wrong the first time, and let me tell you what we're really going to do now.
But that's huge.
There's a lot of courage in all this that has to happen.
There is a lot of courage in humility and vulnerability and being okay saying, I don't know all the answers. I'm going to tell you what I do know. And then once I get an update, I'll update you. And it could change. But here's what I know. I think also, and I loved how you were focusing on the positive around here's all of the potential opportunity that can come with not sugarcoating and, everything's great, but really let's look at the opportunity. But I also think uncovering what's scary for people too. What is it about? Because I think we make assumptions, but it can be different things for different people. So what fear do you have about this change? And let's talk about that because it might be, you never know, it might be something that's totally a non-issue that you can take off the table for someone.
It's kind of like unpeeling an onion. You have to drill down deeper. And that's another, time and effort opportunity. And again, one that you can't assume anything. One of the other things I've always said that seems to be effective, it's what you don't know matters most. And so when it comes to people, because you're right, you just don't know what it is. And in the HR business, when, there's a relationship issue in the company or somebody is really struggling and it's becoming negative to the point that somebody calls HR and says, what can we do about this? It's usually trying to figure out what could it be. And you're right, when you start getting in there, a lot of times it is outside the hallways of the organization. It could be something in their personal life, something that they're just challenged with that they can't really talk about, and to the point that you have to at least make that attempt. But again, a leader who does this before it turns into that type of a challenge where they're keeping themselves open to people, listening to them so that they feel understood. A person who feels understood is always going to have high trust for the person that understands them. So again, in the practices of strong leadership, that's what it is. Empathy and empathetic listening to their needs and their emotions. These are the things that as a leader, if you set those in motion early, then there are going to be spots where you're not going to do it perfectly. And there's going to be other times where, you have the opportunity to correct and be a better leader for them. But you got to work on trust all the time.
But if you have high trust with someone, that makes that conversation so much easier to say, you know what, Chuck, I did not handle that conversation right. Like, can I have a do-over here? Can we talk about this again? Or, sometimes I'll have a conversation and then I process later and, I should have said this or I should have said that. Pick up the phone or go knock on their door and have the conversation.
I had a classic failure of leadership early in my career when I had my first real true leadership role in HR where I really did it wrong to one of my high performers under a really bad scenario that I had to have a moment of courage that I didn't take, but I apologized for it. I said, I messed up. And it helped repair the relationship, where I've been in other
Absolutely.
situations where I've had leaders for me that wouldn't do that. And, they don't make my A-list anymore of what I would consider great leaders that I've worked with.
No, and that's that paradigm.
Yeah.
I think something that I really learned from working in HR that was, I think, unique about being in HR is the opportunity so often for, if we're, let's say, doing an investigation, which is not a pleasant experience. Typically, it's not something we want to do. However, in a situation, let's say it's, two employees are in a conflict of some kind, that process of sitting with one person and hearing their story, sitting with the other person and hearing their story, and recognizing they're both giving you the same account of a situation. It's their account. And being able to hear sometimes how different their perception is of the same situation. And also, I always appreciated the benefit of being able to hear both sides. And I would always think to myself, I wish this person over here could hear what I just heard from this person, because they are totally seeing it in a different way. They think this person's out to get them. And, when I talked to them, I heard, that they're worried about something going on at home, and it's nothing to do with this other person. But, there's such a value in being able to hear both sides of the stories independent, that I think oftentimes most of us don't get that opportunity to do that.
And actually, you've just identified what I think one of the great resources HR provides to its leadership. Well, it really does, because it is fascinating to see how different it can be between two sets of people's views on a common subject.
Yes.
And the role of HR is to try to help bridge that interpretation, understanding between the two. I can think of weekly how my staff has that opportunity, typically just to get in to sit there and say, when there just seems to be, and you can always tell when it happens, because there's tension, there's a frustration that starts to melt between a manager and an employee, or two employees, whoever's involved, that you have this opportunity to say, well, what are you trying to tell me? And because you're the independent third party, it's so much easier, because now then you can go to the other person and kind of reinterpret it for them, but you become the great interpreter.
Yes.
And that is an effective use of the human resources function.
Yeah, and then a connector, because if you can talk about it, the dangerous part of this is that people have those perceptions, and then they take those perceptions and they run with them. If you're never able to talk about them, right? And then you've got the whole confirmation bias thing happening, where they're looking for situations to validate their belief about what happened. And so it can go off the rails pretty quick.
And that, I think, is the great killer of cultures.
Yes.
So back to the whole concept of why culture is so important, because if you don't nurture it the way you've just described it, or fix it when it has its opportunities, you're right. Then you get kind of what you call the cancers that start to develop.
Yes.
And they tend to grow.
Yes.
And again, without having an effective proactive, and it takes a lot of proactiveness on a leader's part to be able to go in there and say, is it really bad, or is it me just kind of keeping my head in the sand? But that's how cultures can eventually be destructive. And you usually see it at a department level. Yeah. It's not the whole company, it's little isolated areas.
Sure.
But then you see it start reflecting in performance, reputation. That's the department I don't want to work for. There's people in there that aren't very happy. And so, those are things that you really have to be mindful of and remedy them. And I do believe it is feedback. And I think HR plays that role, that we have to sometimes provide feedback, not just to the employee, but we have to provide feedback to the manager, that, and that's a really delicate situation sometimes, because you have to keep trust with both parties.
Sure.
But at the same time, helping them understand that they could do better.
Yes.
I always just look for leaders that are always saying that it's the guy that sits there and tells me, hey, I'm open for feedback, Chuck.
Yes.
What could I do better for
and
this?
truly, not just saying that because it sounds good. But
well, they want to grow. They
really
want to learn from it. Where you have other ones, as you said, ego or insecurity, or some of these really, really destructive, qualities of humans that can get into a senior manager or into a manager that really make it very, very difficult for them.
Yeah, I've learned over time that there's so many people that if they have that strong learning orientation, if they have a growth mindset, they have an interest to get better, I do oftentimes see them outperform others in
no
just
question.
that openness, that willingness to try new things, that willingness to grow, think differently, like you said earlier about a leader rethinking what they believe to be true, all of that. I think when you live in more of a fixed situation of this is the only way to do it, or this is the way we've always done it, or my way is the right way only, or my way is the best way only, you lose that opportunity to continue to get better.
Right. And that is the basis of a high-performing company, because it's the history of companies that have failed over time is because they didn't innovate, or they didn't see a competitive pressure that eventually took them. They had failed cultures that weren't allowing that because it was too management driven, and the best ideas, which are always at the front line of your customers, weren't elevating to the top. And it's only because there was an ego that I already know everything, and I've seen executives that are the ones that have to be the smartest one in the room, and they're the ones that usually have the worst cultures.
What? Well, what do they need to learn, right? They know it all.
I know it all, and there's nothing you're going to be able to tell me to impress me about that. And that's the real problem in some businesses that have those kind of mindsets, because then they are not open, and there is no trust. And then when things start going bad, there's a tendency to blame and point.
Oh, for sure. And then everyone's in it for themselves, right? I think I was talking the other day about the impact that layoffs have on culture, and how often and of course that situation, it's a business decision. It happens, but there's of course financial reasons why companies are doing that, but there's a great sacrifice often with culture when that happens, if it's not managed very, very well and effectively. And I think I've seen a lot of what I call the survivor mentality, like the TV show where suddenly everyone, I'm not here to help you anymore. I'm here to protect my job. I'm here for just me. And it becomes pretty dangerous from a culture perspective as well.
And those are tough scenarios to work through. I mean, because as much as that there's techniques that you can use, it's not going to be a perfect technique. But the method of communicating up front on what to expect, when to expect change, how's it going to happen, how's it going to impact you, paying attention as much to the survivors as you do, because there's a tendency to really work very hard for those that are not going to make it, either redeploying them elsewhere in the company or outside of the company, but recognize that the survivors are just as important to you, if not more important. Merger acquisition science is really, really a fine opportunity for HR to apply its resources.
It is. Well, and the failure rate is so high for mergers and acquisitions, and it is tough for many reasons. It's not just culture, obviously. There are many reasons why
my industry has had acquisitions where you've heard about two cultures that didn't align. In fact, I would probably tell you the one that I was involved in. The bank was Citizens and Southern Bank, a 150-year bank out of Atlanta that was merged with North Carolina National Bank, NCMB, and two divergent cultures. One was highly relationship built, the other one was very achievement built. And when they tried to push the two together, it was tough. And the achievement base was going to dominate the other side, and so a lot of the management team was taken out. A lot of consolidation took place, and there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on it. But the Bank of America model was, well, who we're going to acquire next? And as you know, now they're the largest bank in the nation, and one of the largest on the planet. But it wasn't about the employees that they were doing this for, I can promise you.
Right. And, when you were talking about kill the culture, initially my head actually went to, was that a culture strategy of trying to create a unified culture? If we can just eliminate what the current culture is and implement the new culture, which that has a whole host of challenges too when you try to do that. But at first, that's actually where I thought you were going with that.
Well, and that is a great idea. And it's what you probably should do, because there's no way, if the value systems of the two organizations are completely different, then you're going to have to find a new set of values to work from, and they're going to have to be a blend. But it's incredibly disruptive. It eventually does tremendous things for the shareholder value, but it really has damaging impact all the way down the line. But eventually, the company survives. Everything changes. Everybody moves on.
Everyone moves on.
Well, when I say that, I've always felt that if the reason why I left Bank of America was because there were certain things that I was sensing already. It was this feeling that I just didn't fit here, and that's its own story. But when I went to the organization that I left and then I spent 22 years with, I was a much better cultural fit for that organization. So one of the things that you try to teach people is, whether there's a merger and acquisition going on or not, especially if there's a problem with them, maybe there's a better place. And so you align HR processes around that to say that if we get to that point and address it early, then we can assist the employee getting where they should be. And it might be outside the company, it might be in another department. But again, if you catch it early, again, this is talent. This is people's lives that we're working with. This is the ability to understand that if we take that talent that maybe isn't as top level performers as it could be in this role, but we put them in a different one, hundreds and hundreds of stories of how you just see people exploding with ability.
Isn't it amazing?
In the right place. And so the question is it in that department? Is it another department? Is it another bank? And so I've had probably more satisfaction because I've been involved with a lot of mergers and acquisitions and downsizings of working individually with people to sit there and help them find something that's better for them.
Oh, wow.
Because change creates an opportunity.
Yes. Yes.
You got to get their head thinking it's an opportunity, because a lot of times they're like, no, this is not an opportunity.
I mean, most people don't. Yeah, they don't like change.
But that's the concept. Yeah. And again, I think as the head of a human resources function, and you and I have talked about this, HR is the keeper of the culture. Now, keeper in the context that we help the hiring process, we can help elevate some of the problems. We understand the power of a value system, that comes from individual people and all the other things that call to help, turn that talent on. But at the same time, this is kind of what our purpose is. I mean, it's not because we do it for the company; it's because this is what we do for people.
Right.
And that's the component of a very strong human capital professional, is to sit there and understand that we can do amazing things, helping people find their best and strongest place. That goes back to purpose, if you ask me.
Yes.
Because when you're in a mission capacity, when you're working and doing the work that you truly enjoy and are the best at and making the highest contribution, then your organization has a responsibility to help you find that. And I do think that's one of the most opportunistic opportunities we have right now, with all the disruption occurred and the workforce generation that's coming in is asking the question, well, why am I doing this?
Yes.
Because I think they're trying to find their own personal whys.
Yes. I think so. Yes. There's a lot of that going on. And it's interesting, what the expectation is of an employer, what they're going to get out of being a part of the company, being a part of that culture. It's interesting. I was actually just talking with a group of MBA students this morning, and of course I couldn't help but offer unsolicited career advice, knowing that they're going to graduate soon. And I just made a comment. Again, I'm sure I got a bunch of eye rolls, but I said, hey, listen, think about, because we were talking about strengths, and I said, think about when you're going out and you're graduating and you're applying for these jobs, think about opportunities where you can best leverage your strengths, where you can add the most value. A lot of times, and I get it, they're coming out of college, they probably have debt, and they're chasing dollars sometimes. But I said, I'm just going to be clear with you. You spend a lot of time working. So finding something that aligns to what you just talked about. Will you run through those? Passions, values, talents, motivation. What is the fourth one? I missed it.
Well, it's talent, passion, vision.
Talent, passion, vision.
And values.
Yes. Right. Talent, passion, vision, and values. Yeah. If you can find, and it was the same conversation I had, if you can find a role where you're able to do that, it really, it's still work, but you'd be amazed at the difference between if you could just go try to find the job that makes the most money. And if you're miserable doing that job all day long and you're working hard, you have no idea the energy level of that type of a situation versus a role that you're working in where you're able to use all those four. It's a completely different scenario. And maybe, and you have no idea how much financial success you actually might be able to have if you're in that situation because of how you're performing.
The one thing I've quoted a couple times, it's mission over money. And when you think about mission, the company's mission over the money. That's the top line, meaning the top line is bigger important than the bottom line. But the same thing at a personal level. And you've raised this a couple times. Missions transcends roles. You can get in a variety of different roles, whether it's personal, professional, whatever, that can satisfy the core mission. Now, the question is that if something helps you detect that, helps you find that, this is where the role of mentoring, the role of helping people understand and see things, the growth that comes out of that. In my mind, it's an interesting opportunity because I think you can start tackling this at a younger age, maybe in their late teens in high school. But as experiences occur, then they start kind of trying to figure out, well, why am I not happy? Why do I keep moving from job to job? What am I looking for here? And so, one of the personal and professional passions I've always had is helping people understand that there's this thing called purpose that you have that's in those four disciplines, but then go find roles that make it work, to your point. And you're right, there are jobs out there that you might not be understanding because you're just looking for the dollar.
Sure.
You're looking for the job description, basically. And that's kind of the problem. I mean, the education system kind of trains you and develops you for that.
Yeah, go make as much money as you can.
It's kind of the way the world ticks. But but you'll see this, and tremendous examples of, really, really strong interns that I've seen come through my companies before, where, 2 years in and they're doing a great job and they've turned into high-powered ability commercial lenders and commercial bankers. And the one I'm thinking specifically that we get a resignation from him, and one of his customers was a carpet company, and he said, I'm going to go sell carpet. And you're kind of wondering, it's like, what is it about that is what you were really interested in? And you got to figure it was something to do with whatever he was going to be involved in. And maybe it was the fact that he was going to be an owner of the company or the business or something like that. Who knows? But it was there's
something there.
And the investment was so big. But the question is, why didn't we understand this? Why did we see it coming?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that you set up within the HR function is making sure that you have those conversations. Our biggest technique that we use is something called an individual development plan. Every employee is given the opportunity, and it's an empowered development system because it's your plan.
Right.
But yeah, it creates a conversation where the manager is constantly looking at, well, what are we trying to contribute to as a company and a department? But then to have the employee self-assess skills, talents, and passions, and then look for learning partners. But as much as that helps develop a skill that we can use and leverage as a company and help them grow, it also creates an opportunity to find out, well, what makes them tick?
Yes.
Why are they doing this? Why would they have some passion and energy towards that? And a lot of times they might not know the answer, but you can usually see it in the energy that they're putting into the process. And if you're trying to get them to do something that there's no energy towards, because it's just something we need done and they know that's the job that they're in, that's where I said I think an astute manager would sit there and say, well, let's have a conversation about what you really should be doing, because you don't seem to be gravitating to this as quickly as I thought you should be. It takes a lot of ability, by the way. It takes a lot of ability from the manager to be able to do all this stuff.
It does. How do you equip your managers to do that? Because you're right, that is not necessarily just an inherent skill that leaders have. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
We have formal training, obviously, but more importantly, I do think that from our leadership processes that we have in the bank, that we at least make managers aware of what these concepts are, primarily through the consultative approaches that me and my team take with our staff, and a leadership team and an executive team that understands this too. So again, it's just something that we're constantly talking about. Coaching. And coaching is connected to feedback. So when you bring people in who embrace coaching and want feedback, it's a lot easier to do this.
Sure. If you're already starting with someone who's open to it, that helps.
But, we provide assessment tools to help understand different types of personality traits and abilities.
That's great.
Yeah, and there's tons of them out there. Ours is a very basic one called DISC, and it really just helps you understand the difference between somebody with two different profiles sees something differently, but at least you can modify your style towards that person.
It's all about adapting and connecting.
That's a formal training process, but one that becomes a little bit easier in the vernacular because everybody likes to label people based on some assessment. So we walk around saying, well, that's a D, that's an I, and that's a C. But yeah, those are all things that just help the connection occur so that maybe these things can open up. Where it really comes to play for us is that when there's a problem. And one of the things that I think is the more proactive human capital strategy, where HR has always had what they call the progressive disciplinary process. It's not working, give them a warning. Still not working, you better write them up. It's really not working, we better put them on a probation or out the door. I say, and we train this through performance management training in our company, is that you start seeing signs of what they call the marginal performer. Inconsistent. They're up one day, down the next. And there's actually, as you look at what the marginal performer, how they go from that to a poor performer where they're now the cancer in your department, and you teach them kind of the signs to look for, is the opportunity to leverage a conversation, especially if it's performance-based, called a performance opportunity plan. And this is just an intensive
performance opportunity plan.
It's just an intensive coaching process. Now, we already have a system and a culture of quarterly coaching. All of our employees meet with their manager on a 4 times a year basis to look at their individual development plans, look at their goals.
Wow.
And the employee is responsible for this, by the way. They're the ones that bring the results. They're coming to the table with, what they're needing to do the job better.
That probably gets buy-in from managers if they're not the ones having to do
it
every
all the work. The documentation for managers is really small. For the employees, they're the ones that do all the documents. The need for high performers, which is its own subject about building HR around the needs of high performers. But what you start seeing is that when it's starting to fail like that, instead of putting them in the disciplinary process, to start saying, well, we're going to do some intensive coaching. Now, there's a warning at the end that says if this doesn't start to work, then it is going to be discipline, or we're going to open up a conversation about making a change. But it's very proactive. It's very non-threatening, because the employee usually at that point is saying, yeah, I'm not happy. And that's usually what we start the conversation with is, how do you feel about everything? And we don't let them off the hook when they say everything's fine. We say, well, you don't look happy. And that's that moment of trust, because they sit there and recognize what their behavior and feeling is, that 9 times out of 10, they're going to come back and say, yeah, I'm miserable. What am I going to do? I don't know what to do. Now we can start working in a direction that says, let's go find this to make this a positive change. Our responsibilities to all employees in the HR business, or in management and business in general, is to nurture talent. And so you just don't get rid of it. You just don't throw it away when it's not working. And if you can create cultures that people understand that that's what they're there for, to help them grow, then these are the things that strengthen your organization, create high performance, by the way. Because there will be times when it just doesn't work for people. The system that I've just described to you using the POP, I've had my legal counsels that I work with, because sometimes it will get legal. They hate it because I'm taking business from them because it's a mutual agreement at that point that it's not working out. And so, for those out there listening about how do you get rid of a lawsuit, it's going to be using the traditional practices that are more likely to go to lawsuit. Well, this is a way that doesn't result in lawsuits, because it's built on the basis of trust. You're trying to help me. I can't do the job. What are my options and alternatives?
I'd say balance the power there too.
And I'd say half the time the POP plan works because it's just a simple course correction. Now that goes back to our coaching techniques that we train our managers how to do. Coaching is not just telling somebody what to do. You got to show them how to do it. You got to break it down into small pieces for them. And a POP plan usually is a real focused approach to say, if we can just get better at a couple things here, then we'll work on the other things. And that's what really makes it kind of a neat process. But again, think about that as an operating culture for employees that may not be fitting. It's they're just trying to help me get better, folks. That's all they're trying to do.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole perception around it is so different than I remember reading. I think it was Laszlo Bock that wrote the work rules. I think he was the head of people operations at Google maybe at one point, and then wrote a book and was fascinating because he talked about low performers and how so often we just write off people that are, they're terrible, get rid of them. We're an at-will company, we just get rid of them, fire them, find someone new, which we already talked about the cost of that. However, I believe in his book, he said, get curious about why are they not performing? And that's such a different approach to say, hey, what's going on? Especially if it's someone who's inconsistent, because you're seeing maybe the potential that they can perform. And again, I think sometimes it's a competency issue or capability issue where, maybe they just truly don't know the job or they're making, technical mistakes or whatever.
Was it the manager that wasn't coaching or providing the feedback or providing the opportunity for the employee to come and tell them, I'm really struggling in this job, because they were too busy doing their job as opposed to working with the employee that's struggling in their job. And so you look at all those dynamics to sit there and realize is that, if we can get to the bottom of this and figure it out, then we'll take a shot at it. If not, then we're going to maybe have to make some decisions.
And that happens. But at least you've given that effort instead of more of that punitive approach that's, hey, you're not doing a good job and you have to do X, Y, Z to get better or you're out. That doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't. And, working for companies where, people talk. And, they always say if you did something good, you're going to tell 5 people. If you did something bad, you're going to tell 10. Well, I came from a company that really did commoditize its employees, and we had to eliminate employees on a frequent basis just to make our profits, which was wrong, instead of developing and growing them. And, when the word gets out in the street that that's not a place you want to go work, it's like, that makes your job of recruiting even tougher.
It does.
So you want that reputation as to do these things. And it's really fascinating subject because most of HR is built around the issue that you have to do is to manage the non-performers. I say you build tools and resources and processes in HR for the high performer. And because it's the high performer that you really need to be attracting and motivating.
And if you can start with an assumption that someone is a high performer, that's such a more positive lens to approach things with.
And a high performer will self-correct. They will take accountability.
Self-motivated.
They will understand that it's on them, and if they couldn't get it done, it was there. They rarely become marginal performers because because they're usually growing too much and moving in different directions. It's not to say that the what you call the B employee, not the A employee, is important. They're not. It's that they're equally as important. They're just more consistent performers that don't need to have those new things. But it's the one that really starts to struggle. Now, why does that occur? It wasn't because they got worse. It was just the change of the organization. The expectations changed, the goals raised, the technology changed, the strategy changed, and all of a sudden they fell behind. And so it is fascinating to see how somebody, and I've seen more of these cases than not, especially when they go legal, as they'll sit there and say, well, I was a great performer 2 years ago. How could this be?
Yeah.
It must be because the manager wasn't doing their job very well. No, it's because everything changed. And the environment that the organization operates in is consistently changing on a regular basis. That's the antithesis of why non-performers start to show up. But what do you do with them when you start detecting them? And the problem is if you wait too long, then it gets pretty nasty and ugly at the bottom. But if you can catch it early, then it's something that, again, if you have that mindset that I'm here to help and develop employees, then you usually see it when it's starting to happen.
And you're tackling the problem when you're first noticing. You're having the conversations. I mean, you've mentioned communication and transparency many times in coaching, but being able, and sometimes it is hard, and sometimes managers feel uncomfortable, or especially if they think there's anything personally related going on. It's like, well, I can't ask about their feelings. I can't, that's off topic, and
I can't tell you the number of times a manager will come up. Can I say this to them? It's like, yes, you can.
Oh yeah, all the time.
It's okay to ask them a question about how they're feeling.
How are you feeling? I can't talk about that. That's that is not a work item on an agenda.
Am I going to get sued for asking them how they feel? No.
Are you going to get sued for being a human? Trying to build a relationship.
That's pretty much it. You want to keep those relationships strong. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So I know you have a lot of background in mentoring and mentorships, and you're a part of mentor programs. That's actually not something that I haven't really touched on a lot on this show. So I would like, if you don't mind, to really just talk about the experience you've had with mentoring and the benefits of mentoring, because I do think it's a really important tool that companies can leverage.
A lot of experience, whether it was in direct mentoring. I like to think that a lot of the things that I've done in the community supporting executive teams has been through a mentoring role, to be honest with you. Mentoring is an interesting opportunity because it's not so much that you're there just to kind of impart all your wisdom on them. It's really to have them kind of help detect where they're at. And so I think mentoring is a great opportunity for helping people find kind of what those talents and passions are, helping them understand more about purpose. The one thing that I've realized in the direction of my career, and I've asked everybody, I'll ask you the same thing, when you think about the directions you've taken in your career, was it because you were sitting with somebody for weeks and weeks and weeks, or was it just somebody that at one point said, I see something in you that maybe you might want to look into?
Oh, yeah. Someone taps you on the shoulder.
That's what mentoring is all about. Now, mentoring inside an organization, now we have mentoring at First United. It's pretty much tied to this IDP process where you connect with other people just to learn from them. But I think the role of the mentor themselves is a great responsibility to say that you're there just to help shape people's lives. So the work that I'm currently doing with Garrett Mentors, I'm on their board. I've actually had a couple of the children that I've mentored. It's kind of a one-year program that you take on a year-to-year basis with elementary school. The one that I continue to mentor, he's now going to be graduating from high school, and I just kept up with him because of a connection.
What age, I'm sorry, do they go into that program?
They're pretty much elementary school.
Wow. So you've stayed
and I just
connected.
That's its own story, but it was because of that connection about what I felt I was to him and he is to me. And so it's reciprocated. But mentoring, real mentoring relationships are typically fairly short term. They're just these connection points. But the person who wants to be mentored is looking at saying, what can I learn from you? What can I take away from this? What knowledge can you impart on me? And so that's why I said I think it's a natural relationship that has to occur. You can't really force it. In our company, when we talk about finding a mentor, it's not that we're going to assign you to somebody. It's just who do you think you want to learn it from? Because you see them doing something that's interesting to you, and you know that they're different than you or they've been around for a long period of time. But it's something that I've had a lot of passion around, mostly around younger children and education, because I would think that's where the greatest opportunity lies in the world right now. Is that if we can help the youth in any way we can, then they're the ones that are going to be taking care of you and me down the road.
Exactly.
And I'm getting a lot closer to that age. So
we want them to succeed.
We need them to be successful. But no, it's just, especially in the world that we live in today, I think it's even more and more important, because when you think about, especially with younger people, the influences that they have and the way that their mind lines can be established. Talking again about how value systems are learned by the time you're about 18 years old.
Right.
The particular kids that I've mentored have come from very, very bad value systems.
Yeah.
But to see this one that I continue to work with who's enrolled to go into the military. He's an honor student at school now, where he was really struggling before. Gives me a lot of credit. I don't think I take as much as just the fact that he had the ambition to be something different than what he had around him and his family. But that's the role that mentors take.
But if you're exposed to nothing else, it breaks my heart sometimes when I hear stories about just, home situations that kids are in. And I think that's all they know. Yeah. Maybe that's all their parents knew too, that's and
exactly
so on. And how do they even know what's out there and what's available to them?
And the neat thing about this relationship with his name is Aiden, is the fact that it was the family that said, we need you. Can you continue to help with us? He's responding. This is what we wanted him to do in the first place. Garrett Mentors is a program very similar to Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Oh, okay, great.
It's just their own organization they've created up there.
That's
it supports
amazing.
all the elementary schools up in Garrett County. But yeah, that's me on the personal level. But inside the organization, I feel like, especially as you gain more experience, that you do become more of a mentor to people and to help share wisdom. I call it being Yoda.
Yoda.
I'm not quite green and ugly yet, but I'm getting there. No,
but that's one of the reasons I love talking to you. It's just to hear your experience. You have different experience, but we have, I think we have a similar value system, and a lot of the things that we believe in about people and potential and talent, we have very similar thought processes. But still, I like to hear, well, how have you handled this situation, or what's top of mind for you right now? How do you focus on this? It's just learn.
My growth in the HR field was this way. A lot of people have asked me who are my mentors, and a lot of the people come to mind, especially in the early, probably the first 15 years of my career, were just these amazingly experienced HR people that really opened up my thinking, just because of their experiences that they had in either what I call line or corporate HR. But and then it turned into the leaders that I got a chance to support, and just learning from them about how they see and thought and believed, whether it was good or bad, because I think we learn from everybody. But those, I can't say that there was one mentor as opposed to just throughout my career that just, and you still continue to do that.
Yes.
Anytime I get our leadership team, just asking them what their thoughts are, how's this going to work? That just, it's its own form of enrichment, because you're learning all the time.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, as a mentor, you're learning so much too, which is, it's not, you're right. It's not just imparting wisdom on somebody else, which is a very fulfilling and rewarding experience in and of itself, but actually being able to learn. I mean, when I was talking to these MBA students, I recognize that I'm not as close to their age as I used to be, but it's really, I know. I'm like, when did that happen? Actually,
no, you'll be 25 for the rest of your life.
Exactly. I'm like, we're just like each other, and then I think, not so much. But it's so invigorating to be around them and to talk to them and learn from them and stay connected, because that is the workforce of the future. They are the ones that are newly coming into the workforce, and so just learning about them and what makes them tick and what are they expecting out of employers, et cetera, it makes me better too. It's not just about making them better.
We're either learning or we're teaching or we're both. And you're right. I think that's a great way to look at a mentor connection, is the fact that it's reciprocated. Because if it was just, a laborious effort to say I spent time with somebody who's trying to learn from without gaining something back from it, then it really doesn't happen. But that's why I'd like to think that they're short term. Yeah. Because you just want to move in and out of them.
Yeah.
And because the more you get of different perspectives, then the better it'll be, because you just don't want to lock in on one of them. Yeah. I get asked to be mentored with periodically, and I have that kind of in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, we'll go, but this isn't going to be forever. Only because I think they need to go see somebody else at that some point.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Well, and I like that. I used to get a lot of calls on, well, we need to have a formal mentoring program, and what's in place as a formal mentoring program. And I'd say, okay, just fine, but understand that if I polled our employee population right now, I guarantee more often than not, people would say they have a mentor. Right. I know we don't have a formal structured program, but there are mentorships that are happening, whether, it's been dictated or not. And I think that speaks to the fact that it doesn't have to be a formally structured program that's really intense and disciplined, but just encouraging people. I think it's giving people permission and making them aware of the benefits of it, and just saying, it's okay. It's okay, if you and I work together, for me to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'd really like to learn from you. Can we Get a coffee every once in a while.
It's pretty neat you brought that up, because you have companies that will say, we have to institute a formal mentoring program.
Yes.
When we created this individual development plan and this one little line that says, who do you want to learn from, that the employee gets to pick.
That's
cool. All we did. Now, it wasn't meant to be a mentoring program, but we knew that the learning, because it was going to be a horizontal learning, you had to learn everybody around you and next to you. But then all of a sudden you wake up, we've been running this about 5 years now, and you'd say that we have a mentoring culture because everybody's, written somebody down that they need to spend time with. Now the question is, did they get time with them? Could they break away long enough to have a conversation?
Right, yeah.
But it is somewhat informal.
Yeah.
And it does work better when it's that way.
Well, and I like that it's not what do you want to learn necessarily, which I know that's part of it too, but who do you want to learn from?
Right.
Super cool.
I think the responsibility when people ask me about being a mentor is that, help them find their talents and passions. Let them, but that's got to be their discovery. Now, you can give them hints.
Yeah.
Gee, you have this ability to communicate so well. Maybe you should be thinking about a role like this. Or, boy, you seem to be highly analytical. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah.
And it's just that little nugget of information that I can tell you the 3 things that steered me to here. It wasn't long. It was 3 sets of meetings with 3 different people that said, how do I get into HR?
Yeah.
A couple of events along the way, but, it really wasn't a lot.
Yeah. I always think it's funny, and you can probably appreciate this too when you're interviewing people and you're hearing about their career story, how often people just kind of happen into a lifelong career. And it was like, oh, well, I just, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated, and then I took this internship, and here I am 20 years later. And it's always kind of funny to me that a lot of careers are just happenstance of, well, and then I did this, and then this came along, and then I did that, and, here I am.
Here's the play for you and your listeners then, to prove this. Go ask any banker, did they ever think they were going to grow up to be a banker? And every single one of them are going to sit there and say, I had no clue.
No.
And then they have to think about it, saying, well, how did I get here? And they usually boil it down to just 1 or 2 little things.
Yeah.
But what I always say, it's because the common thread is they wanted to serve people, which is that core passion, that core purpose that they have. They wanted to assist and help. Banking industry is phenomenal. It's wonderfully complex. There's so many moving parts and pieces that you got to constantly be learning. So it's a great environment for those that passion have a value around learning and development to be able to do that.
And it's certainly always changing.
And it's always changing. every third week it seems like. But yeah, it's kind of interesting when you ask people how they got to where they are, and they just said it was just kind of these weird set of circumstances.
Yes, it's often way more random than people would realize.
But I think that's why mentors are important, because you can help that steerage process. Because it has to be a moment of discovery. Passions are not things that you just invent for somebody. Talents can be developed. Passions are things that you just get into. So here's a fun one. I do the program that we have at up in the Garrett High Schools. It's called a Work Ethic Diploma. It's an extra diploma they receive for accomplishing certain attributes for showing work ethic while in school. And there's an exit interview.
Wow.
And I love getting a hold of the ones that say, well, what do you want to be when you get out? And there's, I want to be a professional gamer. And
I'm sure there's a lot of that.
Well,
professional YouTuber.
I had my own kids say that to me at one point. But the concept is that as a mentor of that person, you would probably be able to show them it's not the gaming, it's the part of the gaming that they like the most. It's the ability to solve problems. It's the ability to strategize.
Yeah, what is it about the gaming?
That's the concept. And that they recognize that that's what really attracts them to in the first place. And then you as a mentor have the ability to kind of push them in directions of roles that can be that way without the failure rate of being a professional gamer, which I imagine is fairly high.
I mean, it would be for me.
I don't know.
I didn't make it past Mario Brothers.
When they made the ones that had the multiple buttons, my kids said, Dad, sit down and watch. So I was pretty good with the one-hand joysticks. That's how old I am. But that's the concept. You have to be able to listen to what's really passionate to them and find ways for that talent to be able to come out.
And explore.
And explore.
That's so cool. Well, mentoring, certainly there is obviously an advice component to that. I'm dying to hear what leadership advice you would give to other leaders, because there's so much goodness, but what, if you had to kind of boil it down, what advice would you give to leaders out there?
Talk less, listen more. And that's just the one I have to remind myself, because I'm highly communicative. I got a communicative, extroverted profile, and it's really hard to stop and listen. But, I think that's the key to a lot of things, because when we truly start to underpin people, and all the examples that we've talked about here about how when you discover things that you thought were one way that they're not another, it comes from that. And I do think listening is probably one of the strongest attributes of an effective leader. They talk about how the quiet leaders are sometimes the more effective ones, because they're not out there thumping their chest saying, listen to me.
Right.
But I think that's one that I would probably anchor on.
That's a good one. It's hard. Listen listening's hard, and especially for extroverts, it's extra hard for us.
And, the ones that flow to that is, what you don't know matters most. So, but how do you find it? You got to listen for it. You really have to listen for it at that point.
Wow, that's awesome. This, as I knew it would, this conversation's flying by very, very quickly. Anything that we haven't covered today that you were hoping to talk about?
It's been a really wide and rich discussion. I think the opportunity that exists in the HR world right now and in companies in general about culture, about really getting back to this concept about, the crossroads that we're at right now, not only in terms of business, but in society, about the concepts of fear and hope. I think those are really, really strong thoughts that I think everybody should be thinking about right now, and that's a choice. And that if we can look at things through the lens of optimism, we still have to be able to manage crisis and to be able to have the perspective and balance of crisis, but at the same time, you also need to have the optimism of opportunity. So I think that's really what a lot of the things we've talked about here kind of embrace a little bit. Yeah,
I love it. Well, thank you. Sure. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your Yoda-ishness with us today. It's amazing. And it's a good representation for, helping to identify what HR is and can be as well.
Good.
We're not all police and
we're not.
And party planners and whatever else, disciplinarians,
Grim Reapers,
whatever, Grim Reapers. Yeah, you can invite us to your parties. You don't have to exclude us from your events, right? All right. Well, I did give you the heads up, but that we were going to do a lightning round. If you're all right with that, okay. 1 minute to answer as many questions as you can. Okay. All right. On your mark, get set, go. What season best fits your personality?
Fall.
Oh, okay. What's your most used emoji in text?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. We haven't gotten that one yet. What book, song, movie, podcast has had the greatest impact on your life?
Ooh.
I know.
Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
That's a good one. That's a good one. What's something about you that surprises people when they first hear it?
Oh, my goodness gracious. That I can be shy at times.
Ah, okay. Let's see. Fill in the blank. I spend too much money on.
Playing golf.
Ah, yeah. That's easy to do. Let's see. If you wrote a book, what would the title be? Which I think you should write a book, by the way.
See the good in everything.
See the good in everything. Yes. If you catch me by the fridge at night, I'm probably sneaking.
A sandwich.
A sandwich. All right. Hey, you did good. That was that. You went the distance on that one. Okay. You seemed very prepared for the lightning round that you didn't know about. So well done on that.
Not bad. A couple of answers are good. A couple might probably have to think about again.
It was good. Thank you again so much for being on the show. This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everyone. That's all the time we have for today. So until next time, shine bright, everyone.